So in the early part of all religious life, there is a common ground which even extends into the animal kingdom. And this common ground is a certain security as the result of the protection of adult members of a social group or a tribe or a clan or even a kind of animal. As we grow up, however, our ways of life gradually spread out. We may all have had very similar training. We may have all had very similar schooling up to a certain point. But out of the background, there gradually emerges an individual. This individual is said to reach maturity. And when he does this, he is subject to the responsibilities of mature living. He is expected to go out and create his own career. It is assumed that in time he will build his own family. Having attained maturity, or majority is perhaps a better word, because maturity is still elusive. The majority age, 18 now, used to be 21. The individual then emerges as a self-responsible being. Now, what does he bring with him to help him to be self-responsible? In many cases, he brings very little. He has not been well instructed in his family. He hasn't seen the example of close emotional relationships. He has not observed the family responsibilities equally distributed. He has only an education which is fitting him for some kind of a job. If he wants to go further, he must have more schooling. But in all this period of time, he is being worked on from the outside. He is being fitted into a groove or a pattern. And of course, in our generation, this pattern is closing in with almost tragic intensity. So at 21, he suddenly stands on his own feet, but he does not know why. He does not know how to stand on his own feet, and he does not know what to do after he does get on his feet. All of these things are mysteries. And in these mysteries, there very often comes an attitude of helplessness. So the young person goes to anyone he can find whom he thinks belongs to his peer group and tries to get the information he needs. Sometimes he is invited to become a narcotics addict. Very often he receives from others only the same uncertainties that he himself possesses. Yet somehow he must gradually take his place in society. The blank look on his own face is the open door to his progress. Suddenly realizing that he does not know, and from his experiences and endeavors is not likely to find out, that he suddenly has to turn to himself for guidance. He hasn't too much to help him even in that, because in order to be helped from the inside, all of the hindrances on the outside have to be overcome. He has to unlearn in order to experience. He has to shift from the foundation of what he is taught to the foundation of what he needs in order to survive. This type of thinking really begins the religious life of the individual. He may not recognize it as religion. He may consider that it is intellectual or psychological. But actually, the moment he tries to solve his own problems, he releases from himself something that can never be conferred upon him from the outside. He falls into patterns of trial and error. These are natural. He must experiment. He must learn for himself. And the impulse to be an individual and learn for himself is a constructive one, unless his conditioning is so poor that everything that he does is going to continue to be dominated by external pressure. Assuming, however, that he is now beginning to think a little for himself, he may remember or realize that he belongs to some religion. And, much more important, some religion belongs to him. He has to find out how to explain or interpret these matters. If he's a member of a church, he may go to a church counselor to get help and advice in the selection of what he ought to do. From a church counselor, he will probably receive a more idealistic interpretation than he would if he takes an aptitude test. The counselor may try to advise him into what might be termed the sectarian virtues by which life must be regulated. Now, these basic virtues are not bad. They're pretty good. And if he follows them all, or most of them, with care, he is going to gradually reconstruct his own inner life. He's going to shift his center of consciousness from the outside to the inside of his own nature. He is going to begin to think and to plan, and also to develop certain moral and ethical foundations. These he can secure from almost any denomination of any faith in the world. They become the basis of a disciplined pattern. If he will accept this pattern, it will increase and unfold within his own nature. If he cannot accept it because too much mental and emotional pressure is against it, then he will have to fall into the dilemmas of those who are not able to control their own lives. They get into one difficulty after another. Now, over this whole complete pattern of things lies the principle of divine wisdom. The deity is concerned with only one problem: the perfection of its creation. It has no intentions of failing, and failure is inconceivable to a being that possesses all power, all knowledge, all wisdom, all strength, and all love. To be perfect in these principles which we attribute to deity leaves very little space in our concept of God for doubts, jealousies, or for the belief that deity is partisan and therefore is subject to all kinds of earthly intemperances and intolerances. The fact that the complete plan of things is to move everything to the fulfillment of itself, and in so doing to the release of the God in the self. If this is the plan, it doesn't require a great deal of theology, but it does for a time require a certain amount of diligence and faith. The individual has to believe that there is a meaning for his own life. He has to believe also that he is not living for himself alone, nor is he living for his world alone, or his neighbors, or his family responsibilities. He is living to fulfill deity. He is living that God may be made flesh and dwelt among us. Each person, therefore, is responsible for his share in the release of universal law, first through his own nature and then through the natures of those around him to whatever degree he can. There can be success working with self. Working with others may or may not prove to be essentially beneficial. Who is stimulating others a desire to improve themselves. So with this religious concept, there comes an answer to the great problem of materialism. Materialism is simply the justification of a meaningless world. Materialism places all reward in terms of material things in a material lifetime. Life beyond the grave is disputed and denied by the true materialist. All rewards must be here. All success must be here. Because after here, to the materialist, there is nothing. Now it becomes immediately obvious that if this be true, then all efforts on the part of individuals to be anything are pure fantasy. But man, from the human beginning of himself, has had within him this heart core that refuses to accept materialism. It can be thrust upon his mind. It can be taught to him from the cradle to the grave. Its ambitions may dominate his life for years. But an actual materialist is only one in his mind, never in his heart or his soul. It is only the fact that the heart and soul have been blocked by attitudes which are not true. Having come to a point where we begin to realize these things, we can improve our state. Now, the infinite plan of things, working through cause and effect, presents us with a crisis like we are in at this moment. A crisis that is creating more religious thinking than anything that has happened to us in the last 1,000 years. Man reaches out toward God in emergency only. While things go along well, the individual is proud of himself and self-sufficient. But when his own life falls apart, then he realizes that he is inadequate. The world today is very close to falling apart. Nearly every excess, mistake, failure, and crime that we have committed in the name of progress is coming on back to us with terrific punishment factors. We are being warned every day that the policy we have lived by is not right. We have been assured that no matter how we bolster it up, how we try to put patches on it, we must either change the basic concept behind the structure or we cannot succeed. Now this applies directly to the person. As long as we live by a structure that must fail, we will fail with it. The only way we can escape our own loss is by changing within ourselves and keeping faith with a structural concept that can survive and can fulfill the purpose for which it was intended. Private disaster is very much like international problem today. Disaster is complex, compound, interrelated. It captures the individual and he knows not which way to turn to get out of it. Every remedy seems to make it worse. But the whole structure of remedy, the whole concept of modern living, is unsound. It has been perpetuated from generation to generation simply because individuals did not wish to go against their own personal ambitions. So now we have a time when religion is becoming increasingly important to us. And we have to take the faiths of our fathers and put them to work here and now. One thing that is true of most people is that they need a certain amount of associational support. The individual who finds himself completely alone in his beliefs or in his attitudes and discovers this too soon is in trouble.